the left breast for the past 4 months. Coming to history of presenting complaint, the patient was apparently normal till 4 months back when she noticed a lump in the left breast. She noticed a gradual increase in size over this period. It was initially pea size to begin with, and now it has become size of lemon. She has no complaints of any pain, any nipple changes, or any other skin changes over the left breast, and no complaints of any swelling of the arm. There's no complaints of any noticing of any other swellings in either breast or in both axillae. She also no complaints of backache, chest pain, abdominal distension, or headache. Coming to past history, there is no past history of any surgeries in the breast and no history of any malignancy in the past or her. Family history, there is no family history of breast or ovarian malignancy and no history of any other malignancy in the family. So shall I continue, sir?
Yeah, go on. You finish the history.
Okay. Coming to the menstrual marital history, she had attained menarche at 14 years of age. She has regular 30-day cycles. She was married at 22 years of age and has 2 children. Her first childbirth was at 25 years of age. She has breastfed both children for 1 year each. Personal history, she has no habits. She consumes a mixed diet. Sleep is normal. Bowel bladder habits are normal. Appetite is normal, and there's no history of any weight loss. So, on the completion of history, she's a 40-year-old female, 40-year-old premenopausal female, she presented with complaints of lump in the left breast for the past 4 months, which has gradually increased in size over this past 4 months, with no past or significant family history. She has no other associated complaints. Sir, shall I move on to my examination?
No. Can you just summarize the history?
On summarizing, she is a patient is a 40-year-old premenopausal female with no comorbidities. She had presented with a history of a lump in the left breast over the past 4 months, which has shown a gradual increase in size over the past 4 months, but without any other history of any other pain or nipple discharge or any other positive significant past or family.
With the history, what do you think it is possible?
Considering the positive findings in history, which is with the presence of a mass in the left breast, which has been present over the past 4 months and has shown an increase in size over this time period, I would like to consider my first diagnosis would be probably a malignant growth of the arising in the left breast, probably a carcinoma left breast.
You're saying that because there is a lump which is progressively increasing in size over time.
Yes, sir. A lump that has shown definite increase in size over the past 4 months. We'll have to consider the possibility being a malignancy initially.
Okay. Srinivas, sir, anything?
Actually, in the presentation you have sent to me, he said he has noticed a pea-sized lump which has grown to lemon size in 4 months.
Yes.
I think that is not very acceptable. A pea size becoming a lemon size in 4 months is rapid growth, no?
Yeah.
Maybe such things I think we should ignore in the presentation. Otherwise, you will end up in trouble. Pea size is around less than 1 centimeter, and lemon size is around 5 centimeters, no? So such a rapid growth is again more of inflammatory rather than malignancy. But it is a painless lump gradually growing. But this pea size and lemon size, I think you should not present in the exam. Okay?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, definitely.
You could most say gooseberry.
Yeah. Yes. Our patient is not sure. That's a very simple thing. Okay.
Okay.
And you said family history of breast or ovarian malignancy. Why specifically only those two things?
Yes,
what are the other malignancies associated with breast? Why you are not mentioning about that?
Yes, sir. I've also asked for any other history of any other malignancies also, which includes chronic malignancies, thyroid, endometrium, even gastric malignancies, also prostate, male breast cancer, melanoma, pancreatic cancers. They all could come with hereditary syndromes.
Anything else? And soft tissue sarcomas?
Yeah, soft sarcomas, leukemias, adenocortical carcinomas can also come and lead from any syndrome.
See, one thing, first you remember carcinoma breast is a very common condition and is a definite exam case. and most of you know the standard management. So whenever you get a carcinoma breast case, the discussion would stop at some other aspect, like family history, what are all the malignancies associated with carcinoma breast, how we are going to screen them, how you go ahead, and then discussion may go into syndromes, familial cancer syndromes, like that. So each aspect, if you discuss, it will be one day. So you should be mentally prepared to answer all those things in the exam, because straightforward, almost everybody will do well. Okay. Yes. So you put some effort on BRCA 1 and 2 syndromes, how they are tested, in whom you are to test. Okay?
Okay.
Yeah. Continue.
Sir. Coming to general examination, the patient had the ECOG performance status of 1. She was constant cooperative, in time in person. She was moderately built and nourished. There's no pararectus, general lymphadenopathy or fetal edema. Pulse rate was 84 per minute, and BP was also normal, 132/80 in the right arm. Coming to local examination, the patient was examined in the sitting, supine, and bending forward positions after appropriate exposure. And coming to local examination, inspection on elevation of both arms, both breast and nipple areolar complex were at the same level. There was no obvious fullness noted in the left breast. There was no skin changes, no dilated veins, no scars, no ulcers, and no edema. And nipple and areola was also normal. There was no obvious nipple discharge. On palpation, there was no tenderness or local rise of temperature. 2.5 to 2 centimeter hard mass was felt in the left upper outer quadrant around 2 to 4 o'clock, fixed to breast tissue and not fixed to peripheral muscles or chest wall, and also not fixed to skin. The mass was felt around 3 centimeters from the edge of the areola into the upper outer quadrant. There were no other lumps felt in the left breast. There was no nipple discharge on palpation. Coming to the left arm and axilla, there was no significant axial nodes palpable, and the left arm also showed no evidence of lymphedema. The right breast, arm, and axilla was also within normal limits. Bilateral supraclavicular fossa also was examined and also within normal limits, no nodes were palpable. Coming to systemic examination, chest examination revealed bilateral breast sounds to be normal, though no added sounds and no evidence of any pleural effusion. Abdominal examination also did not show any palpable masses or no evidence of any free fluid. Pelvic examination was also within normal limits, and finally, skull and spine also did not show any bone tenderness.
Conclude.
So, to summarize, this patient is a 40-year-old premenopausal female who had presented with a lump in the left breast for the past 4 months, which has shown a gradual increase in size over this period. On examination, it revealed the presence of a hard mass around 2.5 to 2 centimeters in the left upper outer quadrant, with no significant ipsilateral axillary lymph nodes. In the contralateral breast and axilla, was also within normal, and no signs to suggest any systemic spread. So my diagnosis, considering gradual increase in size of left breast lump with hard nature in the upper outer quadrant, would be malignant growth in the left breast, suggestive of carcinoma left breast. And considering it to be a 2.5 centimeter mass with no palpable axillary lymph nodes, it would be by staging wise, it would be clinically T2 M0 CA left breast, M0.
Any differential diagnosis?
Sir, in this patient, I would not like to consider a differential diagnosis. Mass of force present, which shows the increase in size of the past 4 months with hard mass fixed to breast tissue. I would like to consider the provisional diagnosis of CA.
Rapidly progressing hard mass. I said it's fatty necrosis. What is the point I missed?
There is no history of any trauma.
Yeah, most of them will not have.
Also, considering the age of the patient, 40-year-old breast, I would not like to consider fatty necrosis as one of the DBs.
40 years it won't happen.
It can happen, but first differential would definitely be.
No, differential I'm asking, not the first possibility. First you said carcinoma. What is the differential diagnosis? Yes. What is the commonest age for carcinoma breast? Is it 40 years?
No, sir. The commonest age would be around 50 years of age.
Yeah.
Maybe around the late 40s.
So for even carcinoma also, it is not common age. Yes? Yeah.
No, sir. No, sir.
Okay. So what next? What are you going to do?
Sir, for this patient, I would like to first confirm my clinical diagnosis. So for that, I would like to get radiological evaluation and also a histological proof of malignancy. For radiological evaluation, I would like to do a bilateral.
I think your voice is lost.
Fahim,
Not
I can't
audible.
hear you.
Not audible.
Yeah. Fahim, just repeat what you
Hello?
just said. Yeah, now you're audible.
Okay. Am I clear, sir?
Yeah.
It's okay, sir. Okay. So I would like to get a radiological evaluation and a histological proof. The radiological evaluation would include a bilateral mammogram and a bilateral USG of the breast and the axilla to assess the presence of the primary and also the presence of any suspicious axillary lymph nodes.
Bilateral mammogram is a diagnostic or screening mammogram.
In this case, it would be a diagnostic mammogram. I want to look at the presence of the lesion, whether it is a single lesion, whether there is any other lesions that is not palpable, and also the presence of any other lesions in the contralateral breast, and also the presence of any lymph nodes in the axilla.
So what is the difference between diagnostic and screening mammogram? Both are same or different?
Screening mammogram is usually comprised of predominantly only single view mammogram, and it's usually taken by technician, and the patient is recalled if there is any presence of any suspicious findings. Whereas the diagnostic mammogram usually contains at least two views. In this case, a middle lateral oblique and a craniocaudal view, and it is reported then and then, and it happens when the patient has presented with a symptom, like for example, a lump in the mass. Whereas a screening mammogram would be a part of a screening program.
Screening mammogram also will have two standard views. The difference is the supervision by radiologist. Diagnostic mammogram, when you ask for a diagnostic mammogram, they take a standard views and then read them then and there. And if any necessary additional investigation, like ultrasound is required, or additional views are required, or magnification is required, all those things are done by the radiologist and reports. Okay? Yeah.
Yes.
Continue. Yeah. Mammogram done. Yes. I think you have mammogram pictures.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Can you show that?
This is the cranial caudal view of both breast, with the right breast on the left side, the left breast on the right side. And we have the middle lateral oblique view also.
Okay.
On the cranial caudal view, initially we have the mammogram looks adequate. We have we can't visualize the intermammary cleft. And initially the breast parenchyma, we can grade it as probably around B or C by RADS grading. And on cranial caudal view also we can find increased density found on the lateral aspect or the superior part of the filum, close to the axilla, with the presence of also around cluster of small pleomorphic microcalcifications also can be seen. Also, a little away from the density, we can find also a little bit of coarse calcifications, which probably maybe also be benign. This increased density also shows very irregular borders and is around 1 to 2 centimeters away from the skin surface. And there is a high possibility of this being malignant. On looking at the mutilateral oblique view, again, the lesion, the increased density that is found in the cranial caudal view is also visible here, which is found superior to the posterior nipple line. Again, we can find the cluster of pleomorphic microcalcification within the mass with irregular borders and probably one or two speculations as well. The axilla is not well visualized in this mutilateral oblique view. Can't call it as adequate. Whereas the right breast again shows around by RADS B or C breast parenchyma, but no obvious mass or architectural distortions or asymmetries.
Okay.
So this is there is definitely a presence of a suspicious mass with increased density and microcalcification in the left upper outer quadrant, probably a Beirat's 5 lesion. So my next step would be to also get a ultrasound of the both breasts and the axilla. It could help me in assessing the appropriate, better characterization of the size of the mass. Also, I would like to get a better look into the axilla, the presence of any suspicious axillary lymph nodes as well, which can be better made out with a USG.
Fahim,
Yes, sir.
if I may ask, in mammogram,
Yes, sir.
usually there are certain signs which will tell you that it is possibly malignant. There are something called the major signs and supporting signs.
Yes, sir.
Could you just elaborate those?
The major signs of the primary signs in a mammogram would include the presence of a mass, architectural distortion, asymmetry, and calcification. Whereas the secondary signs would be
No, actually, the major signs are the speculated margins and the clustered microcalcifications.
Yes, sir. The mass having speculated margins, irregular margins, microlobulations, and
The
among calcification,
microlobulations are all supportive. Actually, there are two major features, which are the speculated margins and the clustered microcalcification. And what is this clustered microcalcification?
Clustered microcalcification is defined as the presence of multiple fine pleomorphic calcification. Like, for example, it should be at least less than 0.5 mm in size, and it should be at least more than around 10 to 20 microcalcification per centimeter square.
I think it's 5 or more calcification, each less than 1 millimeter in a cubic millimeter size, cubic centimeter size.
Per centimeter cube also.
Yeah. And there are other features, supporting features in mammogram to say it is possibly malignant.
The other features would be increased skin thickening, nipple thickening, presence of arterial distortion, and presence of significant looking axillary lymph nodes, which are all associated features.
Okay.
So it's nipple retraction, not thickening.
Yes, sir, nipple retraction.
And presence of axillary nodes.
Yes,
no? Round axillary nodes.
Round axillary nodes.
When it comes to microcalcifications, the clusters are 5 or 6 in number.
Okay.
And it is not per square centimeter or square millimeter. Each cluster is called cluster if it is there 5 to 6 in number, more than 5 to 6.
Okay.
Yes. Okay.
So we've done a bilateral mammogram and a USG, and it comes out as a single lesion in the left upper outer quadrant. So my next step would be to get histological proof of malignancy, ideally core cut biopsy from the mass.
Okay.
So we'll get
guided.
Yes, sir.
Guided.
Guided core cut biopsy. So
what's the report?
We've done a core cut biopsy. The report has come back as infiltrated ductal carcinoma grade 3, PR8, PR8, HER2 1+, Ki67, 12 to 14%.
Okay. So, what is it?
Sir, it is proven to be a infiltrated ductal carcinoma of the left breast, clinically T2 and 0, with showing good biology, with ER/PR positive, HER2 1+, and
so to which molecular group it belongs?
It probably belongs to a luminal A.
Not probably. It belongs to luminal A.
Luminal A.
Okay, grade is high.
But age is 40 years, grade is 3.
Yes, sir.
But your markers are showing luminal A. Isn't it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Are they correlating?
Usually we get low-grade tumors in luminal A, and also in younger age group we get high-grade tumors. So there is a little bit of discordance between that, but
okay. So molecular wise, it looks very favorable.
Yes, sir. It looks a good biology.
Age and grade are unfavorable.
Yes, sir.
Okay. What next?
So in this patient, next step in the clinical T2 and T2 disease would be we'll discuss the patient, we'll counsel the patient regarding her diagnosis, presence of malignancy, and we'd like to complete our metastatic workup with chest X-ray and USG abdomen to just to rule out any obvious lung or intra-abdominal metastasis.
So in your place, you do chest X-ray and ultrasound abdomen.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
For early breast cancer, we do.
We don't always do ultrasound abdomen nowadays. We used to do that, but now LFT, chest X-ray and LFT is.
Yes. No, it's basically institutional protocols.
Yeah.
You can do nothing and you can do PET CT.
Yeah.
A vast array of investigations can be done. It's all depends on the institute. Okay. Yes, everything is negative. No?
Yes, sir. Chest X-ray and USG abdomen and LFT was negative.
Okay.
So she has a clinically T2N0M0 disease. We'll counsel her regarding the options regarding treatment. She would ideally go in for a primary surgery. So we'd like to counsel her regarding the options of mastectomy or breast conversion surgery. And she was willing for breast conservation. She wanted to conserve her breast. So ideally this patient would be taken up for a left breast conservation surgery with sentinel lymph node biopsy considering her M0 status.
Okay. She wants breast conservation.
Yes, sir. She was very keen on breast conservation. So,
yes. So, the breast conservation, what exactly you explain to the patient? You said you explained, no?
Yes, sir.
So, what are the things you explain?
Regarding breast conservation, we like to explain that it is possible and oncologically safe to remove only the mass along with the safe margin of normal breast tissue around the mass. We'd also like to do a sentinel lymph node biopsy to stage the axilla, which would involve injecting a dye. We usually use isosulfan blue dye, injecting a dye peri-areolar, and then we'll do a sentinel lymph node biopsy. And we also have to counsel the patient regarding the mandatory need for post-op RT, which you would have to take after surgery because we are conserving a breast and we want to decrease the rate of ipsilateral breast tumor recurrence. Regarding the possibility of adjuvant chemotherapy will only come up after if I get in the final HPR. And as she has a good ER/PR positive or negative status, you also need at least 5 years of hormone therapy. We'd also like to counsel the patient regarding that the risk of recurrence, which would be her concern, is almost at par with mastectomy when breast conservation is followed by adjuvant radiotherapy. So, yes, sir.
So, you want to give chemotherapy or not? Possible, you said.
Yes,
definite
sir.
Or possible?
We would ideally like to make the call post-surgery with the final HPR report.
Not extra information.
Nodal status would be better.
Node negative. Okay, that is the lowest.
PT2N0 ER8 PR8 HER2 1+ disease. This patient ideally
grade 3. 40 years, grade 3.
Grade 3, it's high grade.
High grade and 40 years and
in age and
2.5 centimeters. So can you avoid chemotherapy?
In this case, as Sir said, the adverse factors would be she is young age, 40 years, she has grade 3 and she has a 2.5 centimeter fever, even though it is not negative and good biology. Ideally, this patient, if she could afford it, the next best step would be a molecular genomic assay to assess the need for adjuvant chemotherapy, whether she would benefit from adjuvant chemotherapy or not, over and above adjuvant hormone therapy. So,
which one you are doing? Molecular profile? Yes.
We don't do it very often, but for the patient who can afford it, we usually do Oncotype DX.
Yeah. When will you give chemotherapy?
If we do Oncotype DX for patients who have a recurrence score of 16 and above, if less than 50 years of age, as in this patient, would benefit from chemotherapy. So 16 to 25 risk group would benefit from chemotherapy, as she is less than 50 years of age. Anything above 25, definitely we would add on chemotherapy.
Okay. So you're not routinely doing that, no?
No, sir. Not
okay. Coming back, you said they will do breast conservation surgery. Yes.
Yes, sir.
So what are the steps?
In breast conservation surgery, after getting informed consent, the patient is kept in supine position. And after adequate painting and draping of the patient, the surgery starts. We'll initially, before painting itself, we'll initially start with the central lymph node biopsy. We usually use.
What is your protocol? You're doing it.
Yes, sir. We use it for patients with isosceles.
Dual or single?
Single, sir. We use blue dye.
Only blue dye. Okay.
Only blue dye. We use at least 4 cc of diluted isosulfan blue, periareolar, and at 6, 12, and 3 and 9 o'clock positions. And after massaging the breast for around 5 minutes, after that we paint and drape, and we start the central lymph node biopsy. We do central lymph node biopsy with minimal skin crease incision in the axilla, and we remove the blue nodes and the enlarged nodes if present, and send them for frozen section. While we send them for frozen section, we start our wide lobe fixation of the lump. We do a wide lobe fixation of the mass of the lump along with the overlying skin, which should help us in identification and orientation of the specimen. And we aim for a 1 centimeter margin all round, going down up to the pectoral fascia if needed. And after excising the mass, we ensure that there is adequate margins and send the mass also for frozen section. And if margins are adequate, we would clip the base of the tumor and also the 4 margins of the tumor, and close the wound if the wound can be closed with adequate cosmetic.
So the margins are sent for frozen section or not? We don't do that.
Sir?
Frozen analysis is done or not done?
Yes, sir. Frozen is done. Routinely
frozen is done.
Yes.
Okay.
So yes, by the time we'll get the frozen section of the report of the central node, and if any node is positive, we usually by routine complete the axilla level 1 and level 2 node levels are completed. And then we by routine we put an isolated drain. We close the breast parenchyma for better cosmesis, and we close the axilla. So.
You close or don't close?
We close. We close.
You close breast parenchyma.
Yes, sir.
Due to some oncoplasty.
Yes, sir. Usually in this patient, 2.5 centimeter mass, she has adequate breast tissue, so we could get away with without doing an oncoplasty. But if need be, probably a level 1 oncoplasty would be sufficient.
So
what was done in this case for you?
Sir. It's. In this patient, we had actually discussed the options of the patient, and she had preferred to undergo left breast conservation, but she also was keen on getting her contralateral right breast reduced. So we did a left breast conservation surgery, central lymph node biopsy, and a right reduction mammoplasty. And we got 2 central lymph nodes. One was blue and one was enlarged. Both cells were frozen. Both were negative. We did a wide excision of the lump, which is also frozen, where margins were negative. Base is excised, and the right reduction mammoplasty was also done.
Okay.
So the central nodes were negative and margins were all negative. Okay.
Yes, sir. The central nodes were negative, but the margins were also well away.
Yeah. What is the final histopathology?
The final histology would be intrauterine ductal carcinoma grade 3, 2.3 to 2 centimeters with presence of lymphovascular emboli. All margins were well away, and 2 central lymph nodes were also negative on final histology. And the right reduction mammoplasty showed only proliferative metastasis. So it was PT2 N0 CM0 stage 2A disease. IDC grade 3.
Okay. What is this grading? IDC grade 3 means?
The grading is the classical grading is the Elston-Ellis modification of the Scarf-Bloom-Richardson grading system for breast, which includes 3 parameters: the nuclear polymorphism, the tubule formation, and the mitotic count. Each is given a score of 1 to 3, and 3 to 5 is grade 1, 6 to 7 is grade 2, and 8 to 9 is grade 3.
Okay. So what adjuvant treatment you have planned?
So for this patient, she won't afford Oncotype DX. So we'll usually patients who can't afford Oncotype DX, we'll have to categorize the patient depending upon stage, and any favorable and unfavorable risk factors for this patient, considering she was a 40-year-old patient with grade 3 and also a 2.3 centimeter mass. She was counseled and she opted to undergo chemotherapy, adjuvant chemotherapy.
Him, what are those features which, if present, we will almost always consider chemotherapy, adjuvant chemotherapy?
We usually educate adjuvant chemotherapy for any node positive patient. For this patient,
you can any node positive, yeah, pushing it a bit more. There are people who don't give for even 1 or 2 nodes positive.
For
absolute necessary adjuvant chemotherapy is what I'm asking.
For
usually in our setup, in our hospital, which all features necessitate a adjuvant chemotherapy?
Based on based on histology, any triple negative patient and HER2 new positive patient usually will receive adjuvant chemotherapy.
Yeah,
because almost
and
always
the size is more than 5 or 10 millimeter.
Yes, definitely will be more than 1 centimeter usually.
Yeah.
And among the hormone receptor positive, HER2 negative,
and also high grade. High grade we usually don't avoid. We don't avoid in high grade. We don't avoid in triple negative. We don't avoid in HER2 positive.
Yes, sir. Among hormone receptor positive HER2 negative tumors, will you look into the grade and the Ki-67 index to decide upon adjuvant chemotherapy?
This patient you are giving or not giving?
We're giving, sir.
Yeah. What's the standard regimen you follow?
The standard
I don't know what is the benefit of all these things. What benefit given? Anything like that?
Which
we also do in our medical people also discuss with the patient, something online, anything like that.
We have online tools that we look into, which help us in making a decision. We can show an absolute benefit of adding chemotherapy for a specific patient, like Predict Online, which we usually use, which look into all the factors and the tumor size and nodal status, her age and diagnosis, and which can give an objective measure of how much a patient may benefit with adjuvant chemotherapy over 5 and 10 years in regard to her survival.
I think your audio is not audible.
Sir?
Yeah, what chemotherapy are you giving?
The usual chemotherapy that we usually give would be a combination of anthracycline and cyclophosphamide, usually doxorubicin and cyclophosphamide for 4 cycles, cycled every 3 weeks, followed by 4 cycles of taxane. Usually give is docetaxel, again cycled over 3 weeks for 4 cycles.
And radiation?
After that, she will we start on whole breast RT, and we'll also start hormonal therapy along with RT for this patient.
What hormone therapy are you going to give?
She's a premenopausal 40-year-old female, so we'd like to give her tamoxifen 20 milligram OD for 5 years, starting along with her radiation protocol.
You just want to give her 5 years, or you have any other thing?
She is stage 2A disease. We could probably extend it also for another 5 years, for a total of 10 years of tamoxifen. Which
what I'm asking, you are going to give blindly to maximum, or you want to assess in between?
Yes, sir. We would like to start her on tamoxifen, and then for at least 2 to 3 years, and then on follow-up, we would like to assess the presence of her menopausal status, whether she has become post-menopausal. So we can always change to an aromatase inhibitor after maybe a period of around 2 to 3 years of tamoxifen.
So if she developed menopause after every chemotherapy, what do you do?
Patients
at 40 years, 40 years, if you give chemotherapy, most of them will stop menstruating.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Patients who develop amenorrhea after chemotherapy, they're not. These patients don't always. We can't guarantee a menopause for these patients. So we'd like to look into her biochemical factors, like this is the measurement of her estradiol, her LH, FSH measurements, which should give us an objective idea of whether she has attained menopause as of now or not. So we could start aromatase inhibitors earlier.
Yeah. So you can't say blindly, I will give for 5 years. Yes. You have to follow up the patient for menopausal status and confirm it biochemically, and then change over to aromatase inhibitors. Okay.
Because it is seen that if you can give at least 2 years of aromatase inhibitors, it is a better outcome. So we have to as you go along, you have to
So
see if it is
especially when below 60 years,
Yeah.
if you add aromatase inhibitors, they have more benefit.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Could you say something more about this ER and PR 8, the scoring, and when would you add this tamoxifen or aromatase inhibitors? What the score? What is our policy?
The policy that we usually follow would be look into the all-round scoring system of each receptor and progesterone receptor, which looks into both the proportional score and the intensity score, and has a maximum value of 8 and minimum value of 0 or 2 to 8. So we would initiate hormone therapy for patients who have a score of 3 and above, and usually we don't start hormone therapy for patients who have hormone score of 0 or 2.
Yeah.
But what is the standard? What is ER positive?
By guidelines, the standard
Yes.
definition for ER positive would be any cell score showing at least more than or equal to 1% of positivity for ER
Yes.
or PR should be termed as hormone receptor positive.
So ER even 1%, they are considered positive.
Positive.
But 1 to 10% typically don't respond to hormone therapy, and chemotherapy is must. They should be treated like
Triple negative.
ER/PR negative,
Negative.
but technically they are ER/PR positive. So more than 10%, they should be treated like ER/PR positive.
Positive.
Yeah. Then what about HER2?
HER2.
HER2, initial step for HER2 would be an IHC, immunohistochemistry. We would look into the positivity of the HER2 receptor. We look into three variables, mainly how positive it is, the number of cells it is positive in, less than 10 or more than 10% of the cells. We also look into the completeness of staining, whether it is complete circumferential staining or not. And also we look into the intensity of staining, which is be an intense staining or a weak to moderate staining. So regarding this, HER2 IHC is graded as 0, 1, 2, and 3 plus. Patient who has 0 or 1 plus is termed to be negative, and patient who has 3 plus is termed to be positive. But patient who has 2 plus, the result is said to be equivocal. So we would confirm it with the presence of an in situ hybridization, either a single probe or a dual probe. We usually do a dual probe at our institute. And with the help of a dual probe, we look into the HER2 CP7 picture, whether it is more than 2, and also the copy number, whether it is more than 6. So based on those two factors, you would again like to categorize HER2 2 plus and IHC, whether they are definitely positive, negative, or again equivocal.
What precautions you will take when you're doing a biopsy or when you're doing a mastectomy or lumpectomy to prevent false reports of ER/PR and HER2 receptor status?
The precautions, definitely, we would, as soon as the tumor is excised, the cold ischemia time should be kept to a minimum. Ideally, it should be kept to less than 1 hour, the cold ischemia time from the time of extraction of the tumor to the time to which it starts fixation. Also, fixation should be at least 6 hours to 72 hours as per the guidelines. And also, the fixative agent usually used would be a neutral buffered formalin, 10% formalin. And also, ideally, the tumor should also be sectioned into 5 mm sections after considering the margins for better fixation of the agent of the tumor, so as to decrease rates of false negativity while doing an IHC.
If you are to get a better biology,
Yes.
even before surgery, when we see the patient, how do we plan something which would probably give you a better representation of the ER/PR and HER2 status?
Classically, a true cut biopsy would usually has better concordance rates than a final excision specimen, probably because the fixation of the tumor and takes place better with a true cut biopsy specimen, provided it is a guided true cut when you compare it with the final excision biopsy specimen.
Fixation is much quicker, and
So it's immediate.
fixation is much better and quicker. Yeah.
And the size of the specimen also is small.
Is smaller.
Yes,
So it's better fixed.
Better fixed.
But the cold ischemia time should be less than 30 minutes, not 1 hour. 30 minutes is the standard. Okay. So what follow-up advice you will give for this patient?
This patient, I would like to follow her up in the initial first 2 years for every 3 monthly.
Not only, you see, follow-up is not only oncological, other things like quality of life.
Yes.
What other things you will explain to the patient?
The points that I would like to consider during follow-up would be, one would be, I would like to look into the adverse events or the adverse toxicities of the treatment that has occurred, as in the adjuvant chemotherapy, the radiation side effects, and also when she is starting on hormone therapy, what side effects of the hormone therapy and how.
What about surgery? Surgery won't have any side effect.
Yes, sir. Surgical side effects we'll also be looking into. We're looking into the cosmosis of the breast. We're looking
So
into.
most important is our surgical. Okay. Yes.
Yes, sir. And also the status of the wound will also be assessed. And after looking at adverse events, we'll also have a look at the cosmosis. We'll also have a look into.
Will lymphedema occur? Won't occur.
Yes, sir. Lymphedema is a definite possibility. Even though it is less for sentinel node biopsy, it is still a possibility.
Yeah, that is very important. Simply because you have done sentinel node, you cannot ignore lymphedema. You must take all precautions as if you have done axillary dissection.
Yes,
looking into literature, how much of lymphedema chance is there for sentinel node versus usual
for sentinel node biopsy?
Clearance?
Around 10 to 12% patients have lymphedema, whereas for the axillary lymph detection,
I thought it was around less than 5%, and for axillary clearance around 16 to 20%.
Around 20% for axillary dissection.
Yeah.
So level 1-2 dissection is around 5%. When you do level 3 dissection, it becomes 15%. If you give post-op RT, the percentage will go up drastically. Up to 25-30% will develop lymphedema. So before for that, you have to measure the both arms before surgery. That is one thing. And the precautions you tell the patient start from before the surgery. Okay. And with the sentinel lymph node biopsy, it is also around 5%.
Yes.
Because you are going to disturb the lymphatics, you are going to the lymph node and removing.
Yes.
So you are disturbing the lymphatics. So to avoid that, what is the new technique or something described, not yet become practical? Anything else described? What are the other options? Yes.
Reverse axillary mapping.
Yeah.
Technique can be done wherein you can inject redeployed near the first web space, and also you can assess the nodes that are draining the arm and prevent or avoid resecting.
Avoid the arm lymphatics. Avoid the arm lymphatics and go for removal of the. That is one. Yes. What else? Anything else is there? So any studies going on where you are avoiding the axillary dissection completely, including sentinel node. Is axillary staging mandatory now? That's the first question.
There is a study that have looked into the use of axillary ultrasound in prevent or maybe even avoiding sentinel node biopsy. That is sound study. The RCT that is looked into the only using ultrasound and using sentinel node biopsy only for patients who have suspicious lymph nodes, and to keep other patients on follow-up, completely avoiding axillary staging.
Yeah. So the concept is to address axilla only as a staging procedure.
Yes, sir.
It's not a complete therapeutic procedure unless there are involved nodes.
Yes.
So the information you get from staging of axilla now you are getting from the primary itself in the form of receptor studies.
Yes,
you decide whether to give chemo or not, adjuvant therapy or not is based more on receptor studies. Even though axillary nodes are negative, we are going to give.
Yes.
So considering everything, even if you look at the NCCN guidelines also, they say that axillary dissection can be avoided if you don't get extra information that is going to alter your treatment. So that is another option. Of course, the standard is of course sentinel node biopsy. If you look at the options, you've got reverse mapping of the upper arm lymphatics and also observation of axilla in a protocol setting. Okay. Yes. So what are the advices you give to prevent lymphedema? That is the main thing.
Advices would actually start pre-op itself. We would like to avoid causing any sort of trauma to the ipsilateral arm. We would like to avoid taking BP measurements from the arm. We would like to avoid any veni puncture or blood collection from the arm. And also we'll counsel the patient regarding maximum effort to be taken to prevent any sort of trauma to the arm, and also any significant weight bearing. After again during surgery also we'll avoid using BP cuffs and avoid unnecessary trauma to the arm and limit our axial deflection within the said fields. And after surgery, the precautions again will counsel the patient regarding to minimize trauma and also immediate post-operative fatigue measurements from the arm to objectively measure the presence of lymphedema or not. We would also discuss the patient regarding the exercise that has to be done, ball climbing exercises, ball squeezing exercises, and also tying her own hair, things that she can do at home, and to prevent the presence of occurrence of lymphedema, and also to follow up in case of any other swelling or any sort of infection to the ipsilateral arm if it occurs. And once lymphedema sets in, then we'll have to start on curative protocol like congestive, complex decongestive therapy, bandaging, the presence of compressive sleeves, etc.
Okay. Then you said side effects of chemotherapy.
Yes.
And hormone therapy. Required to follow. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, we'll not go into it. What about radiotherapy?
Radiotherapy again, we should be looking into the adverse events.
You are going to give or not in this patient?
Yes, sir. Definitely, will give radiation for this patient. She's underwent
So, what is the chances of recurrence without chemotherapy? What are the chances without radiotherapy, and what are the chances with radiotherapy? Ipsilateral breast tumor recurrence.
Ipsilateral breast tumor recurrence, the rates are actually half without with radiation. So we'll have radiation recurrence rates of 10-year recurrence rates of probably around initially the study showed recurrence rates of around 30%, which has come at 15-year
radiation.
Without
Yes.
15-year rates of 38%, came down to 19% with radiation. So it's half the rates of recurrence radiation.
Radiation decreases the mortality.
Radiation also decreases mortality. For every 4 recurrences that we prevent by 10 years, we can save one life by 15 years.
Which study said that?
The EPCTC meta-analysis.
Okay.
So it has a role in overall survival.
So, what are the side effects of radiation, and what will you advise to the patient? When will they subsidize?
The side effects of radiation would include the initial side effects to the radiation up to the whole breast, because the breast can be income edematous, can show post-RT changes. It can show induration, which will take time to resolve. Also, along with that, there is also different chance of second malignancies to occur in the breast or in the radiated field. We can also have the presence of lung and cardiac toxicity, which can also develop with radiation, and also spinal cord toxicity, which can also develop with radiation. Lymphedema can also increase with radiation, and fibrosis of the shoulder joint with decreased range of motions can also occur after radiation.
So, what are the fields in this patient? Radiation fields.
In this patient, we would like to do a whole breast RT, with probably 2 tangents, the medial tangent and the lateral tangent. The field would include the superior limit would be the clavicle or the superior limit of the breast. Medially, the field should be limited by the sternum, or maybe even 1 to 2 centimeters across on the opposite side. The inferior limit would be 2 to 3 centimeters below the inframammary crease, and the lateral limit would be ideally the anti-axillary line, or maybe even 2 to 3 centimeters from the lateralmost limit of the palpebral breast tissue.
Are you radiating axilla or not in this patient?
In this patient, no, sir. We don't advert. The axilla gets irradiated inadvertently.
It will. See, the level 1 lower axilla will always be radiated when you are giving whole breast RT.
Yes,
but we don't radiate on intention.
On intention.
It
gets. That's why problems with the lymphedema.
Yes.
It is invariable. That's why that is one. When you are observing these different treatment modalities for axilla, surgery is one, radiotherapy is one, observation is one. All 3 modalities are there. They say that when you are irradiating the whole breast RT, the axilla need not be addressed because level 1 nodes are anyhow going to get irradiated. Okay, and that's of course that is all protocol-based studies, not in a routine management. Okay. Yes. Yeah.
Regarding this patient is 40 years of age. We
Yes.
just briefly discussed. Is there anything that you would have done for this patient so that she has a better quality of life coming up, less chance of disease coming up elsewhere or in the same breast? Or
Considering she is 40 years of age, she should ideally come under the guidelines of undergoing genetic testing, at least
Yeah.
a BRCA testing, because every patient under 60 years of age ideally should get a genetic testing done. So in this patient, we would ideally she should undergo a BRCA testing to see the presence of any BRCA1 or 2 mutations, so that we can also it may change our treatment plan with her, and we can also add on probably a reducing procedure for her.
so how do you
This
do that?
patient, will you go for BRCA testing? This patient, look at everything and tell me.
Yes, sir. The age
Sure.
group is no, sir. The age group is one factor, but
Age group is all right.
yeah,
What about
but,
molecular?
yes, her histology is not concording.
Yes.
Ideally, BRCA2 mutations can happen, which can show ERPR positive profile, but usually BRCA1 are triple negative.
Yes. Most of them are triple negative, and young
Yeah.
patients, so definitely they have to go.
Yes.
These patients, this discordant.
Yes, sir.
So yes.
In this patient also you may, because definitely if it is triple negative, the incidence may be around 20%, up to 20%. But young patients, you can.
Very strong
Yeah.
ERPR positive, unlikely.
Yeah, unlikely. So the thing is grade 3, and she has. If she goes in for BRCA1, what is it that is useful for her? Supposing it was not so strong ERPR positive, what are the useful things that you can tell her? What is it? How is it useful to her?
If she becomes BRCA1 mutation positive, we would like to counsel her regarding before surgery itself regarding her treatment plan, because breast conservation, she may have increased chance of developing an ipsilateral breast new primary later on if she conserve a breast. So she'll have to counsel her regarding the possibility. But again, breast conservation is not an obvious contraindication. Also, we would also like to give her the option of a risk-reducing salpingo-oophorectomy, which could be done probably around the same sitting, which could reduce her chances of developing ovarian cancer, and also would be protective for her breast cancer. Not much so in BRCA1, more in BRCA2, because BRCA2 tumors are more hormone receptor positive, but it would definitely reduce chances of developing ovarian cancer.
So what is the timing usually? What time do you do this?
For BRCA1 tumors, we usually advise patient to get the risk-reducing salpingo-oophorectomy by around 35 to 40 years of age, and BRCA2 it could be around 5 years later on, 40 to 45 years of age, because ovarian cancer develop a little more later in BRCA2, and we did not induce menopause for that patient that much earlier.
So BRCA1 and 2 mutations. How many mutations are described and how many you are testing routinely?
We usually test for around 5 to 10 mutations, not more. Even though there are a lot of mutations that have been described.
How many? There are thousands.
Yes.
Okay. And what actually we do is we look at the Western literature and we look for the common mutations that are published in the Western literature. Whereas there is no standardization as far as Indian patients are concerned. We don't know what is the pattern. A few publications which say that the mutations in India are different from the Western mutations. So the available data, we can't blindly go for BRCA1 and 2, but of course, from patient point of view, you can explain these things. And it comes to risk reduction salpingo-oophorectomy. In this particular patient, we would like to do hysterectomy also, because we are going to start her on tamoxifen. So, and anyhow, we are doing a bilateral salpingo-oophorectomy, and she is not desirous of childbearing. Because somebody can say that you can remove both the tubes and ovary, but retain the uterus, so that she can go for surrogate pregnancies. So, any extent examiner can ask you, any extent people also can go. But in this particular patient, as she is not desirous of childbearing, you can do PH and PSO if she is possible.
Yes.
And what about bilateral mastectomy? That is also important. You have to explain to the patient this reduction mastectomy on the other side, apart from doing a mastectomy on this side. Especially the patient wants mastectomy on this side. And of course, the way she needs the reconstruction. She's linked for reconstruction.
Yes, sir.
You can do bilateral mastectomy and the reconstruction. Okay. And then we can avoid radiation.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Lateral mastectomy, we used to think in those terms probably before the post study of 2018.
Yes.
But after that, probably we can always keep the patient on surveillance and.
Yes. All options are available.
Yeah,
Yes.
definitely. Yeah.
Finally, the patient has to take a decision.
Yeah. We can explain all these things.
Yes. So anything else?
Coming back to my question, I thought the audio was, supposing this was not a grade 3, everything else is okay. So it's much better. And you have the possibility of avoiding chemotherapy. What other things and she's not to go for an oncotype DX. Anything else you can make use of to talk to the patient and.
Yes, sir. We usually tend to use online tools that we can use, like Predict Online, which can give us an objective measure of the benefit that the patient may receive with adjuvant chemotherapy at 5 or 10 or 15 years in context of survival. So we could have a absolute measure of what percentage she may benefit when we provide her details.
Do you know how much benefit she will get with chemotherapy?
This patient, I don't expect more than 5% for maybe 3 to 5%.
It will be 2 to 3%.
Yes.
Yeah.
Roughly 2% only. Yes. Okay.
And what do the Predict people say? When do you have to give chemotherapy? When can you avoid? What percentage? Not that everyone accepts it, but what do they say?
Probably around more than 5 to 10%.
Yeah, more than 5%. They say, okay, give. Less than 3%. You may not give. Between 3 to 5%, you discuss and decide. That is what they say.
So, what is the role of oophorectomy in this patient?
Oophorectomy in a non-mandatory setting for this patient, it may benefit her in the manner of ovarian function suppression because she is technically a young age premenopausal patient who has grade 3 tumor. So she would technically be at a higher risk of recurrence. So she may benefit with ovarian function suppression in the and oophorectomy is one of the methods to attain ovarian function suppression for the.
Can you avoid chemotherapy? Can you avoid chemotherapy by doing oophorectomy in this patient?
No, sir.
Why? What is the oophorectomy? You say that oophorectomy is a treatment which has been given up prematurely. So, what are the advantages of oophorectomy? She is 40 years, almost perimenopausal. Okay. How much benefit she will get with oophorectomy?
Oophorectomy, the mechanism would be that we would decrease the exposure to estrogen, and we could induce menopause earlier. So again, as her tumor is hormone receptor positive, it would be beneficial for her for doing an oophorectomy.
No, that is standard answer. I want to better. See, at one point of time, people thought chemotherapy acts by inducing menopause. Okay.
Yes.
So there is a lot of discussion as well as studies, and finally, what today we know is the effect of oophorectomy is like giving CMF, the standard chemotherapy. The original standard is CMF, the first chemotherapy that has come. Incidentally, what is the first drug tried in breast cancer?
Sir, Thiotepa was tried in.
Thiotepa, something else. And why? No, this is just for fun. Yes. It is not Thiotepa, it is Melphalan, L-PAM, that was tried in breast cancer. If you look at the NSABP 1 studies, L-PAM, why it is? Why L-PAM? What is the specific advantage? And why it is given up? L-PAM and Melphalan doesn't cause hair loss. So that is very important. That's why it was started as the first drug. But later it was found to be highly carcinogenic. The incidence of leukemias are quite high. So it's totally given up. Okay. Yes. So the CMF, the effect of oophorectomy is equal to giving CMF chemotherapy. And we feel that now today's standard is the anthracycline based chemotherapy. So we feel that it's slightly superior to CMF. That's why we don't do oophorectomy but go for chemotherapy. But one option would be to do oophorectomy and then put her on aromatase inhibitors. But again, that is totally separate. That is not standard of care, of course. But once you complete your standard of care, then you will be asked about extra things. Okay. Anything else? Any doubts?
Praksina, maybe there are some questions.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Thank you, Fahim, for a wonderful presentation. There are quite a few questions which have been asked both in our chat video in Zoom as well as in the YouTube channel. So I'll start asking the questions to both the examiners.
The student should answer.
Yeah.
Okay, Fahim, we are not letting you go. Yeah. They were asking whether the degree of ptosis and cup size should be mentioned in the examination.
You know how to measure the cup size for him?
Not really sure.
Usually we don't ask such things.
Yeah, one thing that can be asked is that how do you estimate the percentage of breast loss? How do you measure the volume of the breast? What is the expected loss of breast volume? And what should be the reduction mammoplasty on the other side? So you divide the defects, oncoplasty wise. So you divide the defects into less than 10% loss, 10 to 20%, and more than 20%. Less than 10%, you don't need major oncoplastic techniques. 10 to 20, you need a oncoplasty, but it is only displacement. And when
it is less than 20 to 40 to 50, and more than that. Less than 20, you may primarily close. About 20,
10,
you need.
10, usually, we don't close primarily, but you leave the defect so that it is filled with seroma. There is no breast distortion. When you close it primarily, the breast would be distorted. But when it comes to more than 10%, like up to 20 or even 30 also, depends on the size of the breast and degree of ptosis. So when you do a displacement surgery, displacement oncoplasty, there is a reduction in the size of the breast on this side, but it results in correction of ptosis. So you do the same reduction in mammoplasty on the other breast, like what you have done in this patient. The patient will be benefited cosmetically as well as oncologically. So that's where the question of ptosis, the cup size, and all those things will come. And
what are the cup sizes?
Yes.
What are the cup sizes you know about? How do you measure it?
Measurement, not really sure.
I think scientifically look at the mammography and mammographic determination of the breast volume. Either you do a mammography or you can do a CT radiography to measure the breast volume and also know the expected loss of volume beforehand, so that you can explain to the patient what surgery you are going to do. Either doing just simple excision. Patient with a normal size or moderate size breast without ptosis, with less than 10% loss of volume, then you can just do a simple wide excision and leave the defect out. The patient has a large breast, pendulous breast, that's where reduction mammoplasty comes into the picture. That also corrects the ptosis. So you can do displacement on this side also. Okay. But that you need to know. Yes.
Cup size, you have to take two measurements. One is the bust, the maximum around, with it's taken in inches usually. And another measurement is around the band at the inframammary. So you add 4 or 5 to the band to make it an even number. Supposing the bust is around 45, and in this case, I think it was 45, and the band was around 39 or 38. So if you add 4 to 38, it becomes 42. And the difference between 45 and 42 is 3. So if it is 1, it is A. If it is 2, it is B. And if it is 3, it is C. So in this case, I think it was 42C, which was the cup size.
But it is useful in the management of the patient. The cup size is going to change, once you do a reduction mammoplasty. Yeah. So you should understand the patient's expectations. That's it. Okay.
Okay. So the other question was, when they start asking, is there a differential diagnosis? Should the student budge from the CA breast and start talking in terms of tuberculosis and such things, or stick to CA breast?
No, definitely no. See, you have to stick to clear breast or something that is very close to it. Rather than tuberculosis, forget about it. Never tell about tuberculosis in this patients. Unless there are discharging sinuses, don't go into tuberculosis. So it may be differential diagnosis of something like ductectasias and fistulas, like mammary fistulas, those things. Not for a lump without any other thing, never volunteer tuberculosis. So the classical differential diagnosis in this particular patient, that's why I brought in that fat necrosis, a lump without axillary nodes. The possibilities are, one is fat necrosis, other is an antibioma, can be there, but history and other things, but they're also very rare. So the first thing you say, this carcinoma, most likely it is carcinoma breast. The other things that are quite possible in this case, a tense cyst. This is a problem we had faced. See, a patient in this age group that prone for the fibrocystic disease, suddenly they develop a cyst and they come to us, a hard lump is felt. Our first diagnosis is carcinoma breast, but a DD, you can say that it's a tense cyst in a fibrocystic disease individual. But that happened, that can happen because you said it is rapidly grown in a period of 4 months, attained this big size. That is also in favor cyst. That you can volunteer, but the first possibility should be carcinoma breast. And most important is, you don't give unnecessary differential diagnosis like tuberculosis or fibroadenoma or some breast abscess, some unnecessary things. Your differential diagnosis should be, all your findings should fit into your differential diagnosis. Your findings are not fitting into anything else, you have only one diagnosis, stick to it. This is carcinoma. But if you look at this, what we can say is that it's irregular lump, but still in a fibroadenosis is there. Tense cysts are quite common. A tense cyst which is odd in consistency, and there will be some fibroadenosis always involves some amount of fibrosis, so restriction of movement can be there. It's a correct differential diagnosis that anyhow you are going to know what it is by doing a mammogram and ultrasound. Okay. But that you can volunteer. But other things like tuberculosis, no, never. I have never seen a tuberculosis of the breast without a sinus. Okay. If sinus is there, yes.
Okay, sir. And the other question was, how sensitive is X-ray chest and ultrasound abdomen in early breast cancer? Do we need to mention them in the investigation?
Yes, as I already told you, you may not do anything. A good physical examination and history taking. The history is pointing to, or physical examination is pointing to some symptom. You investigate those symptoms. That is what is described. As a routine, we do X-ray chest and ultrasound. But if you are not doing in your place, you can say we are not doing. We are not sensitive. We are not doing. But situations, anyhow, you are going to do an X-ray chest apart of your surgical
anesthesia.
But the issue is, if you look at the American Anesthesia Association guidelines also, you don't need to do a chest X-ray unless the patient has some chest symptoms. So nobody exactly follows the guidelines. So you can tell that X-ray is not very sensitive. You don't do also, doesn't matter. You do it also, yes. That's why I said, as long as you are following what you are doing in an institute, that is enough. If you are not doing anything, you can tell we don't do anything. And if you are doing PET CT, you tell we are doing PET CT. Yes.
PET CT.
Srinivas sir, is PET CT okay in even very early breast cancer as a policy? There are people who do it, I'm asking.
Yes, yes, that's what I'm saying. There are people who are doing it. We don't do it, of course. I think no institute does it.
Good. Yeah, yes. I don't think any institute would.
Yes, no institute will do it.
Acknowledge that.
Yes. Yeah.
Then another question was, in clinically N0 axilla, should we always ask for an ultrasound of the same axilla?
Yes.
I think
clinically means imagology also, because before we go in for sentinel node biopsy, we have to always do an ultrasound and make sure that it is N0 on ultrasound also.
Ultrasound and ultrasound grade FNAC, both will be.
If there is suspicion, we'll do a FNAC from the node.
And if the FNAC is negative, would we still go ahead with an SNNB? Or
there are other features to suggest that possibility of positive nodes, like cortical thickening, the spherical size, what they think about it. if immunologically and clinically it is N0, we'll go for a 7B, or else we'll
So
do
if FNAC is negative, we have to do sentinel node biopsy.
yeah,
FNAC
or
is
else we'll do
positive.
sentinel node.
Yes. Positive, you have to do level 1-2 dissection.
Yeah.
There are scenarios where in a mammogram or clinically, in an early breast cancer on one side, we find some soft nodes in the opposite axilla. Do we need to further investigate that if the patient is T1N0 on one side and we find some node on the opposite side?
You have to look at the node, like whether the node architecture and other features are in favor of this metastasis. If like round nodes are there, odd nodes are there, loss of fatty hilum is there, those things are there, then you may have to investigate. Otherwise, there is no need. Most of the times we find some nodes in the ipsilateral as well as contralateral axilla. If they are reniform nodes with reserved hilum, there is no need to investigate.
Most of the times, these soft nodes are not of much significance.
Another question was whether we need to counsel all patients regarding Oncotype DX in these early breast cancer.
Yeah. Yes, counseling definitely yes, because tomorrow they will tell you and may sue you saying that we are not explained. So you should do counseling. Nothing wrong in counseling. You better tell everything rather than withhold thinking that they can't afford. Then tomorrow they will say that you have never told that.
Yeah, in early breast cancer, which are ERPR positive and all good varieties, if there is a possibility of avoiding chemotherapy,
yes,
or you should always explain why, what benefit chemotherapy gives.
See, the one thing is any investigation should be advised if it is going to change the line of management. So that is the basic thing. So by doing Oncotype DX, you can change the line of management. Whether you decide to give chemotherapy or not, you have to explain to the patient. So the bottom line is that any investigation should be done if it is going to change the line of management. Then you have to explain to the patient.
So someone also asked about CAN assist and other tests.
So many are
which
there.
is
MammaPrint is there, CAN assist is there, Oncotype DX is there. So many are there. Whatever is available, you get it. So many places, especially the private centers, what they are doing, they are giving printout of the NCCN guidelines to the patient. You read and decide. Yes.
As of now, legally, Oncotype DX everyone is doing. What is your experience with CAN assistant Indian thing?
No, we don't have. Many patients, what they are looking at is, they are not looking at complications. They are looking at the cost of Oncotype DX, cost of chemotherapy. The cost of chemotherapy is less than the cost of Oncotype DX. So they are preferring chemotherapy. What our view or scientifically what you say that you are reducing the toxicity and morbidity, but patients are looking at economic aspects. Yes.
Yeah, Oncotype costs around 3 lakhs, 2.95 lakhs. CAN assist people have come with lesser, economically much better, but is it acceptable is what I wanted to know.
No, I don't know. I think in NCCN it is not mentioned. No? MammaPrint is
it's
there.
not. Yeah, it's not mentioned.
So we have to
MammaPrint was the first one to be accepted by FDA.
Oncotype DX and MammaPrint.
Yeah, then later Oncotype, but most people do Oncotype.
Yes. Oncotype DX also for node positive different and node negative different.
Yeah.
Two different things. So node positive also 1 to 3 node positive, you can still do Oncotype DX to avoid chemo.
Yeah, so that is why I said up to 3 nodes, people may avoid some.
Yes.
More than 3 nodes, you have to give.
Suppose the patient is around 65, 70 year old, less than 70, of course, 60 to 70, and low grade with same findings. We will avoid chemotherapy even if 1 to 3 nodes are positive.
Yeah.
And is a frozen section needed for all breast conservation surgeries?
Yeah. So even in frozen section, what they do is you section it and look the nearest margin and do only that margin. And sometimes later they may say that what is obviously not involved on physical examination, microscopically it is involved. So they can come back with positive margin after final histopathology also can happen. And there is one group say that the frozen section is not very effective. you wait for the final histopathology and ask the patient, explain to the patient. So there are, but ideally, yes, frozen section should be available. And the pathologist should examine the specimen, say adequacy of margin should be set, and the nearest margin is usually sampled. They're not going to sample all around them. They're going to sample only the nearest margin or doubtful margin.
It makes it easy for you to explain to the patient,
Yes.
if at all you have to go in and do a
Yes,
re-excision.
Definitely you have to do it. And patients, not only patients, it is described, and patients also would like to have frozen section.
Someone wants to know if there's a role of routine cavity shave in DCS.
These two things. One, either you look at the margin of the specimen or do a cavity shave. And people feel that cavity shave is superior to the margin, but it is one thing. And there are other modalities like you do a ultrasound of the cavity, or you have some other tools to identify the cavity which is more likely to be positive and go and do a biopsy there. So many things are there. But cavity shave is considered superior to frozen section analysis of the margins in some studies.
There's also a query if a blue dye alone is sufficient for SLNB. Fine.
Yes. Yeah.
Even though a lot of studies have shown the utility of using two dyes together, a dual technique, as we have used blue dye for long and we have had better results with the use
Question
of
is
blue
not
dye.
what you are doing. Question is
it acceptable? What does literature say about
it? It is acceptable.
Nowhere it is mentioned that it is acceptable. It is a dual dye is always superior to single blue dye. So both radiopharmaceutical as well as blue dye should be used ideally. Yes. If all facilities are available, we should do both. But with your institute practice, like even from AIIMS,
I think even
also, like
Juliano does only blue dye.
Yeah, that's right. Many institutes.
So there are so many people doing blue dye alone. So probably, I don't know whether it is written that it is acceptable, but it is acceptable in our fraternity.
Yes, that's right, exactly. Yeah. So in the institute, with our experience, it is acceptable. But if somebody insists both should be done or only one, both are superior to one.
So in the final histopathology report, if a negative sentinel node turns positive, do we need to do a completion axilla?
Not your the study, no, which study is there?
Which study for him? What do you have to say about it?
Provided we have resected at least 2 to 3 sentinel nodes, and of them only 1 to 2 nodes are positive, then we could maybe put the patient on observation regarding as per the.
There are other features also. Other things also, not just 3 nodes and up to 2 nodes. There is one. There are other things also.
The patient should be ideally at T1, T2 disease,
age,
ERPR positive.
Biology.
ERPR also is there. Most important thing is if the patient has breast conservation,
and is going for some sort of systemic therapy.
Yes.
And systemic therapy.
RT and systemic therapy. And age is also there, 50 years. Those are 2 things. And you may only if it is grade 3. We had a problem once. For him, I remember. If it is grade 3, the chance is more. It is not really said in that, but in grade 3, if you look, you may not avoid that. That is what we found out on it. So
the hazard ratio is more than 1.
Hazard ratio is more.
Grade 3.
Yeah.
What is micromets?
As per the IBCSG study, the presence of micromets in any number of nodes does not alter the prognosis, so the patient can be kept on top of it.
Then there's a question regarding in the final HPR, what if there is extensive DCIS in the lump?
Extensive in situ component, if we have all margins are negative for DCIS and invasive malignancy, and extensive in situ component, PCS would suffice. But having a margin positivity is more for extensive in situ component, and in case margin is positive, then definitely the recurrence rates will be higher.
Not only extensive DCIS, the margin positivity is also, whether it is gross margin positivity or focal margin positivity. The only focal margin positivity is there, you can still go for breast conservation giving post-op RT. but there is extensive margin positivity in the background of extensive DCIs, then you better go for mastectomy. So margin negativity is more important rather than the compound. Even though they have higher chance of IBTR, still if the margin is negative, we can go for DCIs.
What is the margin set for invasive and DCS in situ component?
For invasive cancer, the ideal margin should be no income tumor would be enough. But for DCIs, you would need at least margin of 2 millimeter for DCIs. For DCIs with Holder's RT, conventional fractured RT, and for accelerated partial radiation, you need a margin of around 3 mm for DCIs.
Okay.
No other questions?
Yeah, I think we have almost reached the time limit for the conference. Thank you very much, Srinivasulu sir, Paul sir, and Fahim. I'm sure the session was of immense benefit to all. And I would like to invite head of our department, Dr. Shaji Thomas, to say a few words.
Thank you, Srinivas sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, sir. Hello, sir.
You have done a good job. You prepared thoroughly. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Good evening, all. I think we had an extensive and exhaustive discussion on all aspects of early breast cancer. I think all the participants have benefited extensively, and we will make this academic program a regular event. I think weekly. This year we couldn't conduct our formal PG course because of this unprecedented pandemic. So we'll continue this academic program as a regular program weekly. So on behalf of the Department of Surgical Service, I extend our sincere thanks to Srinivasulu sir. Thank you, sir. Always you have been a strong supporter of the department, and as always in all academic programs you have been part of the
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a privilege. Yes.
You're always available. That's great.
Okay. So once again, thank Srinivasulu sir, all the participants. Next week also try to catch up. We will make a regular event. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rexina, for the good job.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, the next meeting will be on the next Friday, again between 6 to 7:30, and the case discussion will be on carcinoma ovary. The link will be sent via WhatsApp. Thank you, everyone, for participating. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I'll be ending the meeting.